Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming, and thanks for coming on a Friday. History since post-pandemic at this campus. Not too many people around here on Friday, so I appreciate you making the effort and coming here. My name is Rick Hassey. If I don't know all of you, I'm a faculty member of the College of Business. I teach accounting and finance in the College of Business, and I also am involved with a lot of activities on campus, and one of them is this: why you're here today. You know, a couple of years ago, coming out of the pandemic, we were getting inundated by a lot of questions from our staff, and from our students, and from our alumni about financial affairs, borrowing of money, what's going to happen with inflation. Retirement is a big issue with our staff because a lot of like the population, our staff is aging and getting ready for retirement or planning for retirement every year. And that's a very important subject with our staff, with our students, many of you work. And are you getting paid properly? Are you getting adjustments to your pay? Are you taking on credit and debt? Very soon, you're going to be hearing about your tuition increases for next year. How is that arrived at? What causes that? Is it fair? Are we given the proper information? So we had all these questions coming out of the pandemic. So the university went out and got a grant. It was called a Title V grant, which is from the federal government. And it's like a well-being grant. It's funding resources that have to do with well-being, financial, mental health, physical health, all that sort of thing. So we got this grant. So we wanted to put it to use. So we do it financially two ways. We have what is called financial coaching, where there's a series of meetings that you can make with myself, where we can talk about your individual issues, help, whatever, and you can make appointments with that. It's on Monday and Tuesday and Thursdays and Saturdays, and we can do Zoom and that sort of thing. But the second part of this is what we're doing here today, a series of financial workshops where we get together and we talk about issues and try to give you a viewpoint on things, where to find information, just get you updated on a lot of things. This spring, we're going to have one on debt, borrowing money. That'll be our spring one. And all the issues involved with credit, and FICO scores, and student loans, and everything in that regard. But we thought for this fall, it'd be a good idea to talk about inflation and the cost of living. Here at the university, our staff received a supposedly 2% increase in October on our pay. And it was called a general pay increase or a cost of living adjustment to our pay. Well, it's not really 2%. It's only really 1.75% because they paid us after 3 months of the year has already gone by. But be that as it may, how did the university come up with that? In a couple of weeks, you'll be probably hearing that your tuition is going up approximately about 3%. All right. How did the university determine that 3%? A lot of it has to do with market factors. A lot of it has to do with our competitors, attracting students from the Cal State system, from the Cal U system, from Whittier, from the Claremont colleges, all over. How do we come up with that tuition increase? Well, it's all based on a lot of things, but part of it is our cost of living, inflation. And as all of you know, when you go and fill your tank with gas, or you go to the store and buy some bread or milk or orange juice, or you go buy some new clothes or some new shoes, hey, this is a lot different than it was 6 months ago or a year. Well, what is that? Well, that's the cost of living, and it's called by inflation. So that's what our talk today is about. How is that determined? What does it mean? And how can you apply it to your own personal money management, your own personal management? One of the things that I'm disappointed in a lot of our high schools and junior high schools in California is we don't prepare students to manage money. We don't prepare students to prepare for all of a sudden when you're 18, you're borrowing $100,000 to go to college. What is that all about? Or when you're 18, your parents expect you to go get a job. Well, what do you consider a good paying job? Or what do you consider how you get paid in your job? And we do a poor job with that. So part of this presentation is especially for our students and making sure they're aware of what is happening with money and how to prepare for it and how to understand it. And because a lot of you know, and I can say this in my own family, is our parents and the people who we live with are many times in denial about money. They don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. Well, how am I supposed to know what's going on if you don't want to talk about it? So that's one of the stigmas that we trying to alleviate here. Make you feel comfortable about money. Make you feel comfortable about cost. Making you feel comfortable about asking somebody, why did this price go up? Could you explain to me why I'm paying more for this? Can you explain why I got this raise instead of this raise when I hear other people getting other raises? What's the understanding about that? You're owed that explanation. You're owed to ask those questions. So that's something that we want to talk about and address it here in this meeting. And one of the interesting things about this is that we want you to be able to not only ask the right questions, but be able to understand things. When you hear on the news that the consumer price index is 3.3%, what does that mean? Or when you hear on the news that the unemployment rate is went up this morning to 3.9%, how does that mean? What does that mean to us? All these kind of numbers are always thrown at us, but what do they mean? And especially, what do they mean to us who are in higher education? All of us here are in higher education, either as workers, either as students, either as supporters, either we have children, we have brothers and sisters going to school. We're all involved in higher education. So how does this apply to higher education? And also, how does it apply, as I said earlier, to our personal money management, to managing our own money? And as you know, a lot of stress in our lives comes from money. Worrying about, oh God, I get paid next week, but it's already all spent. Or, geez, I get paid next week, but I don't have enough money to pay rent, or whatever. It's a lot of stress. So the more we understand and feel comfortable about this, it relieves a lot of stress in our lives and makes us enjoy our lives a lot better. So that's the purpose of this. That's the purpose going forward. I want you to use this as a way of knowing, oh, there's somebody here at the university that I can talk to about this. There's somebody here at the university that I can go ask questions about my pay or my retirement or my inflation, or my landlord just raised my rent. Why that happened? Well, understandably, you'll kind of understand why he or she raised your rent. At the same time, you're asked questioning about, well, all right, you raised my rent, but am I getting any better services from it? Are you taking care of the parking lot? Are you taking care of my room? Are you putting new carpet in my apartment or whatever? It gives you the ability to say, okay, you're raising it 10%. What am I going to get out of that? And that's one of the struggles and issues in higher education today. Everybody's being pinched and pinched and pinched and doing more work for less money. What is my value? What is my return as an employee from that? What is my return as a student when they raise the tuition 3%? What am I going to get better from that? Those are things you all should ask as consumers. It's a very important point. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Oop. So what is inflation? Okay. What is inflation? Well, inflation is like it's like circling around the track. You go one way, halfway around, and then all of a sudden you're into the wind. The wind's changing, the wind is blowing, and you get around the track in the backstretch, and now you're blowing it, the wind's blowing against your face. And you find it harder to run or to walk, you're resisting. And then you go around the track a little bit more, and now you're downwind, and it's making it a little bit easier. Well, that's exactly what inflation is. Inflation is a market basket of how we live: food, energy, living expenses, clothing, health. And it's all put into one big basket. And that basket is what we have to live on, or what we pay for. Now, that basket, depending on where you live, Southern California, Northern California, Nevada, North Dakota, wherever, that basket is a little bit different because the winds are different in that part of the country. You're California, where it seems like we're always battling into the wind because there's such a high demand in California for services. That's why inflation is a little bit higher in this part of the country than it is in other parts of the country, because we have more people demanding more services. So we have to understand that. That's why the cost of living is higher here in California. But at the same time, is your pay and is your benefits and is your value out of that, is that going to be increasing as well? And many times it doesn't. And that's what you have to understand. You're going to be paying more for orange juice, for rent, for gasoline, but is your pay going to be going up accordingly? Probably not, because we're a product of those goods and services. We're a part of that. We're providing those goods and services in our job. But how companies, how institutions survive and go forward, they have a little margin between the cost of those goods and services and what they charge for those services. But we're right in the middle of that. And that's what makes it different. And that's what makes it sometimes very frustrating and hard to understand. And so inflation is the ability to buy something, and it's always changing by the winds of the economy, by the places and the nature of where you're living. It changes month to month. Right now, the inflation rate in America is 3.7%. Right today, 3.7%. The highest the inflation's been in the last 5 years was in June of 2022, especially for employees of Laverne. Note this. In June of 2022, inflation was 9.05%. Just a little bit over a year ago, 9%. It has now gone down because the winds have changed a little bit. The government has increased interest rates to slow down the economy. Thus, inflation has dropped. All right. It's a game that's always being played politically and socially of how to adjust that. You could spend a whole program on just that. But inflation is what our buying power is. What can we buy today versus what we can buy a year ago? And in our area, Southern California, the national is 3.7. Here in Southern California, it's closer to 4%, a little bit higher. So that's the relationship of what is called the CPI. That's the index that measures inflation. What does the CPI have to do with COLA? Okay, that's the nature of this presentation. The inflation index is registered by the CPI, which is a series of numbers over a quarter time of these prices of products, services, and how it goes up or down over time. The cost of living adjustment, or the COLA, like you get your pay raise, 2% general pay increase, that's an adjustment measuring the effects of inflation over a period of time. Okay? So, for example, if we were getting paid today 2% and the inflation rate is 3.7 for the last 12 months, are we coming out ahead? No. It's always our pay or our services are always, there's a time lag. There's a time lag. And for us as employees, us as students, the same thing with tuition, we have to be aware of that time lag. Will we get that money back? Probably not. But that's part of it. So the key thing is inflation index, CPI, measures the change in prices. And this is an interesting point these days, because remember I mentioned earlier about how population is increasing, or the age of population is getting up. Right now, health costs are 18% of the inflation index. Health costs. All the health services make up about 18% of inflation. In 3 years, 2026, it's going to be 22%. Why? The population's aging. We're living long. More demand for health services. And that percentage of the basket of inflation is going to be higher for health costs. So that's something to be aware of. This index is always changing. Now, it's a little bit weighted to food and energy costs. Those make up about 55% of the index, all those costs. Pretty a lot. But at the same time, what's happening in the world these days? A lot of us are switching out of sustainable fuel prices. We're not driving fuel cars anymore. We're driving electric cars. We're driving other things like that. This is going to be constantly changing. We have solar in my neighborhood. Half the houses on my street have solar power. And they're always talking to me about, hey, I haven't paid electric bill in 2 years. So that's changing as well. So this inflation index is always going to be changing, always going to be altering. And we as consumers have to know that. Now we just talked about inflation. This is an example of COLA. And I use the example which none of you can relate to. This is the Social Security increases every year. All right. You can't relate to this yet. Some of us a little bit closer than others. Yours truly. All right. But many of us don't have any idea, who cares about Social Security? The way I hear it, I'm probably not going to get it anyway. Well, you're going to get it, trust me. But this is an example of COLA. This is not inflation. Inflation is used to calculate COLA. Right now, just last couple months, Social Security Administration, and this is my father, my grandparents, our parents who are retired, anybody who's retired over 65, they're going to get January 1st, 3.2% increase in their Social Security benefits. Okay. That's the cost of living adjustment. So many of us retire when we're 60, 65, 62, 67, and then we have to live on that pool of money for the rest of our lives. So what the federal government does is they add to that pool or that payment cost of living adjustments, and the CPI index, the inflation index, goes into the calculation of this. But also, I like to use COLA as an example of matching my pay. Am I getting these pay increases every year to match this? Because it gives me a good idea that I'm being compensated competitively with what the world thinks people should be compensated. All right. Look at last year. My dad was really smiling. I remember a year ago today, around this time, my father calls me up. He says, "Hey, Ricky." My dad calls me Ricky. "Hey, Ricky, 8.7. I go, "What are you talking about, 8.7? I just got the notice. We're going to get an 8.7 increase in our Social Security." Now, for my dad and my stepmom, that's a big deal. That's their money. That's what they live on. That pays the expenses. He has retirement, but that pays for other things. So he was all excited about that. He goes, "I bet you're not getting 8.7 from Laverne next year." You're damn right. You're right about that. So, but that's what that is. And here's an example over the last few years. This gives you like a little index of the increases in cost of living over the last few years. And notice something. In some years, there was no increase. Boy, was my dad bummed about that. There was no increase. In other words, during that course of that year, costs didn't go up by much. So it gives you a nice indicator. Now, one of the reasons what I did today is I wanted each one of you to take this home with you. This is my presentation. It has this information in it. It has also areas that you can go. If you have more questions, you can ask me or go forward. So this is for you to take home. Okay. But this is a great example of the difference between COLA, cost of living, and inflation. Because even here in our own university, and all universities, when it comes time to talking about pay, and I'll talk about higher education pay in just a minute. It's always, what's the inflation index? Well, the inflation index is month to month going back the last 12 months. So it's always changing. So you really can't get a feel about, well, what happened in 2022? Well, what's going to happen in 2023? What is the overall increase for that calendar year? Well, that's what the cost of living adjustment is. It kind of takes a year of inflation, pulls it into a little factor. And that's what this is. So basically, COLA for 2024 is the inflation index for this year, 3.2, all wrapped up into one number. And basically last year, remember I said in June of 22, inflation rate for that month was 9.5%. But if you look at it in the whole of 22, the inflation rate for the full 12 months was roughly around 5.9%. Still pretty high. But then it really shot up last year. And this is what got a lot of us in the faculty and staff here at the university a little bit upset, is how much inflation and cost of living was, and we were getting very little pay increases. A lot of people were getting upset about that. And the university has noted that, and they're trying to figure that out, but it's a constant battle. You're going to be dealing with this as students when you go out into the job market. Once you agree to a salary at an employer, they got you locked into that salary. Your adjustments will be cost of living, unless you get a pay raise by going up in job responsibilities or something like that. If you get hired at $50,000, that's your base pay. And how your pay changes over the next few years will be by cost of living adjustments or pay increases by inflation index. Unless you find more responsibilities, then they'll up your pay accordingly. So that's something to remember when you're negotiating salaries or looking at salaries of companies when you're getting a job, is that's going to be your base pay going forward. And that's something that a lot of us don't even consider when we're looking for a job or thinking about what type of pay we need to live in Southern California for a job. That's a big step. And that's one of the things we counsel a lot of our seniors in the College of Business is when you're out looking for work and you're looking for a career, looking to where we're encouraging a lot of students if they can do that is go outside the state for a while, get some experience in Nevada, Colorado, Texas, where you can make a little bit more money, work your way up through the company, and then if you want to come back to California, then come back. But locking into a pay rate in California right out of college, it's tough, as all of you know who pay rent or live in this state. It's expensive. So that's something you got to be aware of. And that's a key thing that a lot of us don't even think about when we're looking for work. We just want to find a job. We want to find something we like, but pay is a big deal. So this is basically what COLA is. It's an adjustment of a full 12-month period in relationship to inflation, and it's in one number. And this is what it's been for the last few years. It gives you an idea. And one of the things, I was sitting down with my wife when I was walking through this presentation, see if she had any comments, and she said, you know what? We haven't been paid those amounts the last 10 years. It's an eye-opener. And it gives you something to think about. It gives you something to ask your employers about. Now, in regards to tuition students, our tuition has been, except for these last 3 years, has been pretty much about that as far as increases. But last year, our tuition increased 2.9%, far below the inflation index. Same thing for this year. So how does a university manage? Well, this is the revolving circle that I was talking about going around the track. Yes, in order for attract students and attract customers like you all, we have to give you lower tuition or lower tuition increase because we want you to come back. But at the same time, who's going to get sacrificed because of those lower revenue streams? The staff and the services. The services. Our athletic teams. Many of our departments on campus go outside to raise money to make up that difference. And that's fine. It's a lot of pressure on those people because the gap has been closed by going out and raising our own money to run our departments. That's a tough way to struggle. So again, that's something you should be aware of, how this all works. COLA, a huge number. If people who run businesses these days, they watch these numbers like hawks because they now have to try to give increases or charge their customers or pay their employees that is competitive, but at the same time manageable within their own organizations. That's very difficult. It's tough. And you should be aware of it. Here's just a little description I threw in about what defines this consumer price index, and you can take this with you, and how it's calculated. And I know a lot of us are not numbers people, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the actual physical calculation of this, but it's a series of calculations. Now, this is the formula used in California, which is a very powerful agency called CalPERS. It's the state employees. You work for the state, schools, colleges, government. CalPERS is a very powerful organization, and they keep track of this. In a college world or private college world, it's called Coupa. And we'll look at that in just a minute. But these are ways of looking at costs, and these are the calculations. And here's a chart you can look at of the CPI for Southern California, our area, over the last 3 years. And notice how in the 21, 22 range, it dramatically went up. But notice the reason I like this chart is this is all items that make up the inflation index. And the blue is just food and energy. It shows you how great a percentage food and energy play of the overall total. And that gives you an idea. Most of our costs or most of our expenses that we live on are food and energy. The next big one, if I were to put food, energy, and living, rent, housing, it'd be really close to the line. But this just gives you an idea of how this goes. Right now, here we go, a little bit over 3%. But this is our market basket in California, where we are. As you can see, it's constantly up and down and changing and then down. And it's all based on supply and demand, and it's based on the economy that we're living in. A lot of it's based on, well, not a lot of it, but some of it's based on social and political issues. But a lot of it's based on the supply and demand of where we live in our community. You know, wherever I travel around the country to go visit family or go to conferences or whatever, people always say, geez, you're lucky to live in California. The weather's so nice. And whenever I watch TV, it looks so nice at the baseball games at Dodger Stadium and all stuff. But then in the next breath, they say, well, I'm glad I don't live there though. Because they see the pictures of our freeways. They see the pictures of the costs and expenses of living here, and they see the housing prices, and they go, you know, it looks really nice. I'll come and visit you, Rick, but I'm not living. Welcome to the real world. It's like that. That's what it is. And that's the impression, and that's how it is in Southern California. It's expensive to live here. The offset of that is days like this. The offset of that is getting on the 210 freeway. The offset of that is we know every day is pretty much going to be the same. Geez, when it rains here, people freak out. Back in New York, it rains, oh, big deal. Here we go. So again, that's an idea that you, especially as students, and the reason why I'm saying this is as you look at your path in your career or your life, yes, your family's here. Yes, you have friends here. But sometimes it might be wise maybe to go outside of our little cocoon here in Southern California and see if you can go to other places of the country to get experience and maybe not be under the financial pressure that you would be here in Southern California. That's a tough decision. So to summarize our area, what is the predicted inflation rate for this year, 2023 and 2024? This is an analysis done by the UCLA. Sorry, we don't do this in our college of business, so I had to borrow UCLA Anderson. So this is the graduate school at UCLA Anderson, which is a wonderful institution. And this is what their predictions are. They have think tanks. They work with the banks, local banks. They work with employers in the area. Disney company does a lot of work with the UCLA Anderson pictures about knowing an idea what they should pay their people. A lot of companies in Southern California use this as a standard by which to gauge their budgeting and their planning. Based on the inflation forecast, the average consumer price inflation should be about 4.1 by the end of this year for the 12 months 23, 4.1. And that to 3.9 for next year. That's the projections for next year. That's compared, here we go, 9.5% in 2022 and 2.44 in 21. 2022 was a rough year for costs. And I'm sure I don't have to explain that to you guys. Okay? So how do we calculate this? While food and gasoline price increases are remaining fairly slow, I don't know where they're getting at now when I went to fill my tank yesterday. Housing costs are going to climb. Anybody tried to find an apartment lately?
Yes.
Holy moly. It's unbelievable. A one-bedroom apartment. All right. Housing costs are high. Why? Supply and demand, and the cost of putting up housing is going up. The forecast of consumer price hikes and California averaging and so on for this coming year, these are all based on inflation, based on what we think is going to happen. Why is California cost of living so high? Again, we've been talking about this. High demand, lower supply, so supply and demand. Housing is very expensive here. That is a lot part of it. And in turn, so that makes this all more expensive. So that's one of the things that you as students have to think about is, okay, I'm going to go out in the world. I'm going to have some fixed costs when I graduate. I'm going to have my student loan. I'm going to have an apartment. I maybe have a car loan. All right. You have to think about when you're looking at pay and whether to live at home or stay. No, I want to get an apartment. Then you see the cost of the apartment. Hey, mom and dad, I'll pay you rent at a lot cheaper rate. But you have to think about these things and how it relates to you and the cost structure. Higher education. I showed this to my wife and she got mad. Not at me, she got mad. This is Coupa. If anybody here in the staff and listening to me on staff, this is the College University Professional Association of Human Resources. They keep the data for colleges and universities, if you're thinking about working at colleges. Okay. Coupa last year had an inflation rate of about 6.8% for colleges. I don't know where they come up with that, but that's what they said. And here's how much the pay increased for employees of colleges around the country. Administrators had the highest pay increase. Professionals, 2.9. Now, what's a professional? Professional would be like adjunct instructors. They had 2.9. Staff, 2.9. Didn't happen here at Laverne, but that's what the national average was. And this is what gets my colleagues in the faculty all around up. 1.6 for tenured faculty and 1.5 for instructors. I'm an instructor. Tenured faculty or faculty that have tenured positions. That's the pay in higher education. Not very good. Not very good. So that's the world we live in. And that's a reason why I showed this, because I knew a lot of students would be here. Well, Mr. Hassey, that doesn't really affect us. Yes, but it does reflect you, because the quality of your education is going to be driven by who we get to teach you. And a lot of people are leaving the profession. And it's changing. Coach Krieg has a tough time finding coaches because they demand certain pay in Southern California. That means the quality of his staff might be limited. That doesn't make sure, but it does. How do we go out and get good talent that you're paying $50,000 a year for? Are you getting the best possible education for that $50,000? Makes it very difficult with inflation and cost of living and pay increases to keep up with that. But the thing that burns my hide, here's a political comment here. If any administrators are listening, and I know one is, why do they get a bigger share of the pie when they're not doing the actual teaching? Well, they're not doing the actual advising or working with students. That's a little bit out of whack. And we're trying to deal with that here at the university now. And all universities are, trust me. Right? Cal State system just negotiated big pay increases because their faculty were threatening to walk out. There might be a strike at the Cal State system in another month where adjunct instructors and research student assistants might go out on strike. There's a lot of controversy going on in education now, and you as students should be aware of what your faculty and staff and what you have to deal with tuition increases to help make this better. So I thought I'd throw that in. That's kind of like a little paid political comment there, but I kept it light. Okay. So how do we plan for this? All right. We've just seen all the inflation index and we've seen all the numbers and it's kind of depressing. Or how do we plan for this? How, as we as individuals, as money managers, and yes, you all are money managers. You have a checking account? You have a credit card? You have a savings account? You're a money manager. How are we going to manage this? Well, we have to understand about the true cost of money, and that's interest rate. Every morning I wake up. This is how boring my life is, but it helps. Every morning I wake up and I look for the 10-year United States Treasury yield. If it goes up from the prior day, inflation. If it goes down from the prior day, things are going to get better. If it goes up from the prior day, that means if I want to go buy a car, I'm going to pay more for it. If it goes down from the prior day, that means if I want to get a mortgage, it might be a little cheaper if I have good credit. But the 10-year United States Treasury yield is my measurement of the world that which drives inflation? Interest. Remember, interest is the cost of money based on the future value of that money. And I don't want to get into a big economic symposium here, but it's the cost of money. And if inflation and interest go up, your money is losing value in your pocket today. And that's what you have to watch out for. And as a planner, if you know that inflation keeps going up every month, or if that US Treasury yield is going up and up and up, that means now is maybe the better time to borrow money before it gets even more expensive. Or now's the time to not even borrow any money at all and lay low and live on cash. A lot of us can't live on cash. All right. The credit card is a way of filling those gaps of our cash flow problem. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But we have to understand interest rates. And I know it's kind of boring in your life to get up every morning and look in the newspaper or go on your Google and go on to Yahoo Finance or Google Finance on your phone and say, oh, what did the 10-year Treasury yield do yesterday? Well, what you want to do is you want to follow that maybe on a monthly basis. If the yield going up, that means interest rates are higher and loan and expenses. It's going to be expensive. The cost of living will go up. You see, when interest rates go up, that means the people who are providing food and energy to you, their costs are going up because almost all of them borrow money to provide those services to you. And that if their costs are going up, they're going to pass that on to you. That's that circle effect again. That's going against the wind. Inflation, when interest rates are going up, you're going against the wind because it's becoming harder and harder to pay for things. That's a key thing to know about. So always in the back of your mind, always ask yourself, what's interest doing? Is it going up? Is it leveling off? That's why that 10-year United States Treasury yield, that's called the risk-free interest rate. If any of you financiers in Madison, I know is one, she's taking accounting now, she better be aware of this, is that tells us which way the winds are blowing. Higher, more winds, tough. Rates are dropping, a little bit easy. It's going to ease up. Things might drop off. Interest rate, good thing to know about. How this involves in planning in our economy. Well, I wanted to throw this slide at you because I know I'll be giving you a hard copy. But this is a way of seeing how this all fits in. We have financial intermediaries, banks that keep track of our money. We deposit money, and what comes out of that, we use that money to pay for our expenses, but also some of us invest. Some of us put some money aside. So one of the key things that I urge all of you to do who are listening to me today, no matter if you're 19 years old or 59 years old, is have a good idea or a plan for your money in whatever shape or form that might be. I tell all of my students who come and do financial coaching, well, they say, well, geez, Mr. Hassey, I just got my 3rd credit card. What? 3 credit cards? Why? Well, I just, one's at the limit, so I needed another one. Oh. You should spend within your means. My grandfather gave me great advice when I was 15 years old. I got my first job caddying on a golf course. And I got my first paycheck, $50. I immediately went out and blew it. And the next day I go to my father and I go, Dad, can I borrow $10? He goes, you just got paid yesterday. Oh, I spent it. What'd you do? I bought a new baseball glove. All right. Next time, if you need something, find out its cost and save for it. Put money aside. Because now what are you doing? You're now out of money, and you need some money to go out with the homeboys to cause trouble or do something, and you don't have any money, so you got to borrow me. And as you get older, I'm not going to be there to borrow. It's going to be a credit card that does that for you, and then you get into more trouble. Credit cards are good things, but it's a tool. It's not something to cause you more harm, and that's where you have to understand your spending. So if you're in a high inflationary time, if you're getting only a 2% pay increase and your costs are going up 4 or 5% and gasoline is $6 a gallon, you're going to have to reduce your spending and reduce some of those expenses, or you're going to be relying on credit to make up the difference. That's how you apply this. If you see you're living in inflationary times, you got to plan for that or try to work around it if you can. And it's kind of like this is the track motive I'm going here today. It's like a process of understanding how to manage your money, develop financial goals, plan strategies, develop ways of which you can maybe begin to start saving. And that's a difficult thing. You get a paycheck for $125 after taxes, and that paycheck's got to last you. You're in school, yes, but that paycheck's got to last you for 2 weeks. $125. Well, just going up and filling your tank would probably be $70, $75. That's the end of that's what you're almost out of your paycheck right there. And then you kind of like going out to Starbucks now and then, or meeting your friends for a burger, or what, going to a movie. Well, hey, next thing you know, you're using a credit card to pay for the movie tickets. So you just have to find a way to be disciplined. And I know this is easier said than done. Trust me, we've all been there, especially me. But it gets to a point in your life where this is nonsense. You're going to have to be able to manage it. Credit cards, I'm not saying anything's wrong with having a credit card, but sometimes they become a vehicle for taking a shortcut. And that's not good. So you want to plan around it. You want to know where you spend your money. I'm going to skip over that. You want to be able to keep track of what you spend. We have a personal finance class that we offer seniors here at the university. And it's part of the Business College of Business, but it's a non-business major course. And in this class, we teach students about investing, and we teach students about managing their money. And one of the exercises we do in that class is, for the whole semester, keep track of their spending in a spreadsheet, on a piece of paper, just for a whole 16 weeks. Where do you spend your money? At the end of the semester, it's a real eye-opener. I spent that much on Starbucks. I spent that much on going out with the homeboys. I spent that much on clothes. Good God. Well, you guys know what clothes cost. They're expensive. But keeping track of that, then the exercise is part of our final examination. Okay, this is where you spent all your money this last 16 weeks. Now write down, what was your income over the last 16 weeks? What was your pay? Take home pay. In every case, it was less. Welcome to the real world. Now's a good time to try to get that in line, fix it. But here's the bad thing. I have 50-year-old people. The same thing happens. They keep track of their expenses and they overspend than what they earn. Thus, they have big credit card balances. And then that's a revolving cycle, because when you have a credit card balance, you got to keep paying that into the future, thus reducing your ability to buy new things in the future. And it ends up causing a lot of problems. And then when we live in high inflationary times, and I still consider us in high inflationary times, in my opinion, most people would say no, but I still, anything over 2.5%, 2% is, I consider high inflation, because I know what we're getting paid. See, high inflationary times means interest rate could be 3%, 4%, 5%, but if you're only getting 1%, 2% raises, it's high inflationary times, because you're not getting compensated to be covering that. So you're always running behind the cost. That's why I get upset when people say, inflation's under control. Really? I got a 2% increase. Well, I got a 1.75% increase this year. Is inflation under control for me? No. Oh, yes, if I'm LeBron James and I'm making $100 million a year, and I've got inflationary in control, but how many of us are LeBron James? Not too many of us. And so that's the thing coming out of this session today that I want you to be aware of, is that's what you need to be aware of is, okay, people tell me inflation's under control or it's not as expensive, but the money you have coming in, if that's not matching that, you have to adapt. You have to be able to adjust by keeping track of your spending, by keeping track of where your money's going. And at the same time, always have some way of saving anything that you can. Anything that you can. So that's what's next. and this leads into our workshop next spring, probably be in the 1st of February, I believe, middle of February, is, all right, now that you kind of know your spending, now you kind of got to handle what this inflation and cost living, now I know what I'm getting paid. How do I put all this together into a financial management, personal management? How does this work for me? What do I want to do? If I'm 30 years old, I'm married and maybe beginning a family, I got responsibilities. I should have insurance. I should have a stable environment to live in. If I'm 20 years old and I'm beginning to start a career and a job, well, do I have leftovers from my education? Do I have to pay off a student loan? Do I want to leave the house and have an apartment on my own or live with some people? If I'm 40 years old, do I start thinking about more seriously about allocating more of my resources to retirement and investing? If I'm 50 years old, I definitely should do that. So whatever stage in life you are, you have to build your planning around that. But it all starts with understanding the environment that you're living in. Is it expensive? Is it getting more expensive? And what is your compensation and what is your career driving you? One of the main reasons, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to college, is to give yourself marketability. Marketability. Your market is if you're in sociology, if you're English, if you're in the sciences, if you're in business, if you're in athletic coaching, if you're in training, if you're in education, if you're a teacher, whatever, what's your marketability in the market to get paid based on your market? What's the demand for your profession? Some professions don't have much of demand, so they don't get paid as much. But that's your career. And if you like doing that, do it. Because yes, money is important, but trust me, if you're unhappy and making a lot of money, a lot of money ain't going to make you happier. Trust me on that. Take it from experience there too. So you want to find a career that you enjoy, but what's understanding the marketability of that career? What can you get for pay? What's the supply and demand for you out there? I tell every freshman class that I have, you're building, yes, you're trying to deal with Professor Hassey's quizzes and you're trying to deal with the noise at night in the housing units. You're trying to deal with having pizza every day for friggin' lunch, and you're having to deal with whatever. And you're trying to manage your career and manage your life and take care of your brothers and sisters and make sure your parents are happy. You're going bananas. That's short term. Long term is, remember, you're going to get out of here in 4 or 5 years, 3 years. Where are you going to be then? What's going to be your life then? And the same thing holds true for our staff. You want to have a nice life when you're older, when you're retired, as you wind things down. You don't want to be worried about money when you're 60 years old. Trust me, it's awful if you got to deal with it. So you always got to plan for the future, even though sometimes we're in denial about that. Have somebody help you plan for the future and make it kind of fun. Fun, future planning? Yeah. You design a system that fits your personality. Take notes on a pad of paper. I'm a computer geek. You should see how many spreadsheets I have at home, keeping track of everything. Whatever fits your personality, that's what you should do to make yourself master of your own credit. But before you get started at all, understand, as I said earlier, the environment that you work in now. Cost, inflation, COLA. Okay. We have a few minutes left. Questions? Anybody? Any questions from our outside users? Questions? You're too easy. But this is what I recommend. Oh, it's almost 1 o'clock. Take this with you. Take this with you. Look at it every now and then. But at the same time, look at it in reference to yourself. Okay? I'm a sophomore. How does this apply to me? Well, I work. I have to pay for my car expenses. My parents charge me rent. How do I apply with what I earn and how I live? Am I always behind? And also at the same time, I'm a major I've chosen my major. Where do I want to be in a couple of years? Now, a lot of us, don't beat yourself up if you don't know where you want to be in a couple of years. That's okay. No, I don't even know what I'm going to be doing in 6 months. But at the same time, kind of think that way. Where do I want to get to? And also rely on people to help you. The best source of financial advice I ever got in my life was from this professor in college that everybody hated. Everybody hated him. He was, they just didn't, he was mean. He was a curmudgeon. That's what they called him, Dr. Curmudgeon. But he was there to help you. He died 2 years ago. Right up to his death, I kept sending him emails asking him for advice, helping me, asking his perspective. Find those people in your life that can give you a perspective. Don't be in denial about that. Share failures. Share when you make a mistake. Geez, I went to Vegas last weekend. I took a $500 cash advance on my credit card to play the tables.
To get rid of the shame that way, by sharing. And then
be able to talk about it. Yeah. Realize your mistake and also get a perspective of, well, you know what? Maybe that might not be a good idea to do again for a while. So these are things you should start, but don't be in denial. Be open about it. And I know sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes it's not easy telling your parents that maybe you spent too much money or you spent money that you shouldn't have. But if you feel comfortable, that's a good way of dealing with it. Okay. I got a couple chat questions here. Hang on. Yes, for the people listening, we will post the recording of this presentation and a link to and a download the PowerPoint for you to get in a couple of days. So look, we'll send an email out and we'll be sharing that with you. Okay, so don't worry about that. And also you can get a copy or whatever. Another good thing about this, and maybe I'm stepping beyond my bounds here, is especially for you younger students, is share this with your parents. Share it with your family. Or if you're like me, share it with your kids. All right. I was very fortunate in my life where my grandparents and my parents they were always working. So they were always telling me about failures in their business. Or telling me about balancing the checking. I learned that at a young age. Boy, did that save my butt later on. Be able to share that. Yes.
So with that, and I think I kind of know part of the answer, but I worry sometimes about worrying my children.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're open about money to some extent, but so I have a 20-year-old and then 14 and 12. So what do you recommend, like a real way of talking about money, and thank God I'm decently okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like they just raised the rent for me.
Yeah.
So
mm-hmm.
I don't want to even tell them that, right? Because I don't want them to be like, oh, are we gonna have enough? Yes. Like, what's your advice?
If they're that age, they're fairly mature that I would think they could handle that. But at the same time, you got to explain to them that, geez, the rent is raised, and here's why, and then you maybe should ask your landlord, why'd you raise the rent? Or get an answer. If not, you could probably figure it out. Costs are going up, inflation, right? But you just explain that to your kids. You got to deal with always constantly things are changing economically or financially for you individually. And you have to be aware of that. Everything can't be the same. And when you're in a cocoon of a family, we're in a cocoon of a family relationship, sometimes children are isolated from that real world. And to just share that with them that rent's going up. So we have to be careful. We have to do this. Or electricity's going up. Geez, you just have to share with them that, not in a negative way, but in a way that helps them learn and understand it, because they're going to have to deal with it in 3-4 years anyways. And that's why, even Chris has a younger son. But right now, and I'm not telling Chris how to raise him, but right now he should be getting involved with maybe, and I know he has a savings account or he keeps track of things, learning how to do that, learning the importance of putting money aside or keeping track of that. For a young person, that starts the seed of learning how important that is. Chris.
Yeah, because especially for my son, because he wants to spend money on V-Bucks, which is like Fortnite. That's his value of it, but he doesn't understand well, those V-Bucks cost $8 every time you do, you get 1,000 of them, right? And so he would spend all his money on that, so when we talk about stuff like that too, because it's everyone's at kind of a different stage, and my biggest thing is, and I've seen this happen with some of my friends' kids, was the fact that their kids had no idea about the financial trouble that their parents had, and they just kept spending and spending and spending and spending, you know, and the kids did, and you know, the parents wouldn't talk to them about it, you know, so that was kind of it. So like we've always, you know, like my son's 10, but we were trying to keep teaching the value of that dollar of, you know, to buy save, you know, here's your birthday money, Dave. Don't spend all $40 on your V-Bucks right now. You know, like I can't do that. You know, so you know, because what do you want later on down the road? That type of stuff.
And as a lot of you know, in the family environment, if you don't do this, and parents get divorced, then the first thing kids go, "Well, it was my fault," or how did I cause this? And it was all about money. It wasn't about them. A lot of it was about money and hiding things and being in denial and not sharing and not understanding. That's a difficult thing to do. And that's why I like to have mentors or people that beyond outside the family you can go and talk to. Hey, what do you think about this? Before I talk to my wife about it, I'm thinking about doing this. And that's sometimes a good way of doing it too. But I wanted to assure you, we have these services at Laverne, and take advantage of it. If you need help, need a perspective, feel free to call on us. Not just me. There's a lot of people here. Students, you might have a particular professor you admire or feel as could be a mentor. That's a good thing. We have staff people that mentor students, coaches naturally. So take advantage of those because they can really help you. And if you're a staff person or you're not a student, have people in your life that you can go talk to and be honest with about money. It just, even if you won't like to hear the answer sometime, it's good to just know that, and that's good. So again, we are around. We have all this information for you. We'll post this on our YouTube site. Allie, I know, has a YouTube site for the Lewis Center. We'll make this PowerPoint available. Take your lunches. We have extra lunches, so take them, please. And thank you very much for spending your Friday with me, and hope to see you all again. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.